The wind howled like a hungry wolf against the 67th floor of Skyview Tower, rattling the glass panels that sealed Victoria Langford inside her ivory cage of power. The city below glistened in a blur of cold steel and condensation, a jagged puzzle of ambition half-shrouded in December fog. Inside the penthouse office, however, not a single item was out of place. Every object, every leather-bound dossier, every gleaming chrome fixture was curated to reflect one absolute truth. Perfection was not optional. It was policy. Victoria Langford stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, arms crossed over her silk blouse, eyes unmoved by the beauty of San Francisco's skyline. Her heels were silent now, planted firmly on imported Italian marble, as if she herself were another fixture carved out of the office's cool minimalism. She sipped espresso from a cup so thin it could crack under a whisper, her eyes scanning the morning reports streaming across the screen of her tablet. "Victoria," came a cautious voice from the conference table behind her. "We've received another proposal from the San Francisco Unified School District. They're requesting free Spanish language integration for their software rollout, translation of educational materials, and teacher access in underserved neighborhoods." Victoria didn't turn. Her gaze remained on the world below, where traffic glimmered like moving circuitry. Her voice, when it came, was as smooth and detached as glass. "Translate this document," she said, lifting the file with 2 fingers like it might contaminate her, "and I'll give them my leftovers." A pause. Then she laughed, not the kind of laugh that comes from joy, but the clinical, performative kind that chills a room by degrees. "Honestly," she said, turning to face her assistant, "they expect us to localize all their learning modules for free? Because their budget can't stretch far enough to teach English to their students?" "No, that's not my problem." Rebecca, her assistant, flinched behind a sleek laptop. Her ponytail, too tight, seemed to tug at her better judgment. "They're asking for help, not a handout. Bilingual classrooms are collapsing across the district. The program this contract would support Roosevelt Elementaries is weeks from being shut down." Victoria walked to her desk, the click of her heels returning like punctuation marks on final sentences. She tapped the screen. Stock prices. New licensing deals in Taiwan. A tender from the Ministry of Education in Dubai. All rising. Roosevelt Elementary, she repeated. "Is that the one where they staged that protest last year? The chalk signs about equity?" "Yes," Rebecca said, quieter now. Victoria sat, crossed one leg over the other. "Let me be perfectly clear," she said, each word clipped and shining. "This company was not built to cater to sob stories. I don't subsidize failure. If children can't learn English in this country, then their parents can pay someone who will teach them. Not me." Rebecca didn't answer. On the muted television behind her, a news ticker ran across the bottom of the screen. Bay Area homelessness spikes 41% increase in child displacement amid school closures. A shot of a young girl holding a torn notebook flickered silently. Victoria glanced at it once, then picked up the remote. Mute. The screen went dark. Have legal draft a standardized response denying the school district's request, she said, and raise the translation licensing fees. If they can't afford the product, they can't afford the service. Simple. Outside, the wind continued to beat against the glass like a distant, relentless drumbeat. But inside Skyview Tower, Victoria Langford was untouchable. Fluent in 9 languages. Yes, but empathy was not among them. Not yet. Asterisk. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. San Francisco pulsed under a curtain of cold drizzle and low clouds, the streetlights glowing like suspended embers in a storm. Victoria Langford's Tesla Model X glided through the city like a black shark, silent and sleek, impervious to the elements. Inside the climate-controlled capsule, she scrolled through quarterly projections on her phone, her manicured thumb flicking past red-highlighted reports and AI sentiment analyzes with surgical precision. Turn left on Market. The GPS chirped in a sterile British accent. She ignored it. She already knew where she was going. Or rather, where she always went at this hour. Linguitech's private garage was only 2 blocks away, accessed through a side alley near Montgomery Street, tucked between a shuttered flower shop and a graffiti-tagged wall that someone power-washed once a week, only for it to reappear like a ghost that refused to be erased. But something was different tonight, as the car slowed at the narrow alley. The headlights caught a figure curled beneath the awning of a defunct newsstand. It wasn't unusual to see shapes hunched in corners this time of year. But this one didn't move, didn't flinch at the approaching lights, didn't shrink away like so many others did when faced with the judgment of expensive steel and glass. Victoria's hand hesitated on the steering wheel. For reasons she couldn't explain, she stopped the car. The figure was small. Too small. She tapped the window control and lowered it an inch, letting in the cold slap of wind and rain. Her eyes narrowed. It was a girl, alone. Maybe 9. Maybe 10. Soaking wet. Hair stuck to her face in strands. She wore a jacket that looked like it had survived a war zone, sleeves frayed, buttons mismatched. She sat with her back pressed to the wall, legs folded beneath her, a notebook balanced on her knees. She was writing in the rain. Victoria stared. The girl looked up. And their eyes locked. There was no fear in the girl's expression. No shame. No plea for help. Only curiosity. Her eyes were dark brown and eerily steady, like wells that had seen too much and judged too little. Victoria felt something uncoil in her chest. An unfamiliar feeling. Discomfort. The girl raised a hand slowly and knocked once, just once, on the passenger window. Victoria hesitated. She couldn't remember the last time someone knocked on her window without being invited. Even the board of directors waited for her to speak first. Cautiously, she lowered the window another inch. "Excuse me," the girl said, her voice calm and soft, with an enunciation that felt out of place on the damp sidewalk. "Do you have a spare pen?" Victoria blinked. Of all the things she expected, a request for money, food, shelter, that wasn't it. "A pen?" she repeated, her voice involuntarily hoarse. "I ran out of ink," the girl said, holding up a small, chewed-up ballpoint that looked like it had written one too many truths. "And I've got a lot of thoughts tonight. Big ones. Sharp ones." Victoria's lips parted. Her mind spun, trying to make sense of this interaction. "What ... Are you writing?" The girl hesitated. "A story. About a queen." Of course she was. Victoria glanced at the notebook, waterlogged and bound with a rubber band. Despite the weather, every movement the girl made to protect it was deliberate, shielding the edges from droplets. Drying her hand before flipping a page, something strange surged in Victoria's throat. Something almost like heat. "Where are your parents?" she asked, the question automatic, a reflex. The girl didn't flinch. She looked at Victoria like someone who had learned not to be startled by anything anymore. "Gone," she said simply. "Angels took them 2 years ago. Car crash on Geary. I was waiting in the after-school program when the police came." Victoria's stomach twisted. The words were so calmly delivered, they might have been copied from a weather report. Clear skies, light wind, dead parents. The girl tilted her head. "You're Victoria Langford," she said. It wasn't a question. Victoria frowned. "How do you know that?" The girl pointed to the glowing tower 2 blocks away, where Linguitech's logo pulsed like a heartbeat against the clouds. "You come by here every day at exactly 7:30. Same car, same driver, different suit, but always the same face." Victoria stared, stunned. I've seen your interviews, the girl continued, as if discussing a book she'd finished last week. You said once that language is leverage. That whoever controls communication controls civilization. I did, Victoria admitted, unnerved. You're wrong, the girl said quietly. Victoria's eyebrows rose. Excuse me? The girl hugged the notebook closer to her chest. Words aren't weapons. They're bridges. You're not building civilization. You're just building toll booths? And people like me? We're not allowed to cross unless we pay with a language you already own. Victoria opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Not rage. Not dismissal. Not even logic. Just silence. The girl stepped back from the window, notebook in hand. You're the queen in my story, she said. But not the nice kind. The kind with a frozen heart and a castle made of mirrors. Then she walked away, her shoes splashing in the puddles like whispers on stone. Victoria didn't move. Couldn't. She didn't know this child. But somehow she had just been seen. More clearly by a 9-year-old than by anyone in the last 2 decades. And for the first time in years, Victoria Langford, Queen of 9 Widges, ruler of silicon and steel, felt the coldest emotion of all, doubt. The next morning, Victoria Langford awoke with a sharp breath, as though dragged to consciousness by something unseen. For a few heartbeats, she didn't move. Her bedroom was as pristine as always: white marble floors, ashwood paneled walls, and a minimalist canopy bed draped in linens softer than breath. But something was different. The silence felt ... watchful. She sat up, pushing aside the duvet, like a general rising from uneasy slumber. The light filtering through the penthouse windows was silver, sterile. Even the city below looked colder, as if recoiling from something unspoken. She hadn't dreamed in years. Not since her mother's overdose. But last night, she had. A queen made of glass. A child with lightning in her eyes. A notebook floating in rainwater. Ink bleeding across the pages like wounded veins. She shook it off and stepped into her morning ritual. Almond-scented cleanser, a serum that cost more than a week's rent, espresso calibrated to exact milliliters. Every move had been designed to keep chaos at bay. But today, even her espresso tasted ... off. The girl's words echoed like a whisper behind her eyes. Words aren't weapons, they're bridges. Victoria had built an empire by turning language into a commodity, stripping it of culture, repackaging it for profit. She didn't care if that bridge led anywhere, as long as she owned the toll gate. But now the thought made her stomach clench. She reviewed the day's calendar. A midday acquisition call with Zurich, a dinner with a Saudi investor, and a courtesy PR visit to Roosevelt Elementary, the very school whose program she'd recently gutted through a licensing hike. She'd agreed to it weeks ago. More for optics than obligation. Now, it felt ... dangerous. Still. Victoria Langford never backed down from a scheduled engagement. By noon, she was standing in front of Roosevelt Elementary, flanked by a pair of interns and a silent driver. The building was tired, cracked paint along the windows, a rusted gate that moaned like an old man when pushed open. The air smelled of wet leaves and budget cuts. Principal Gonzalez met her with a tight smile. "Miss Langford," she said, voice clipped, eyes wary. "You're on time." "I'm always on time," Victoria replied, scanning the schoolyard. Children played beneath gray skies. Their laughter, distant and chaotic, rang like music Victoria didn't know how to dance to. "You wanted to see?" "Where the program was housed," Gonzalez said. "Come with me." They walked through narrow hallways lined with hand-drawn posters. One caught Victoria's eye, a child's crayon drawing of 2 hands reaching across a broken bridge. In jagged block letters beneath it, "We all speak something. Let us be heard." She felt a strange tightness in her throat. The principal stopped at a locked classroom door. Room 2B. This was the bilingual unit, Gonzalez said. We had 3 rotating teachers, including Miss Santos, who was beloved by the students. One of the best teachers I've ever worked with. What happened to her? Victoria asked, though she already suspected. She's teaching part-time at a bookstore now, Gonzalez said, bitterness barely veiled. Your company's licensing policy made it impossible to afford the updated translations. So we shut it down. The kids lost their language, their bridge. Victoria stared at the door's dusty window. There, carved into the wood, faint but still visible, were 3 small letters, IRR. She leaned in. What is this? One of the kids. Gonzalez murmured. She used to sit here after school and write stories in both languages. She said if she kept writing, someone important might read them one day. Victoria didn't need to ask who. The initials burned like coals in her mind. Isabel Rojas. That girl. That rain-soaked child who'd stared into her soul like a mirror. You. Said she used to? Victoria asked. Gonzalez nodded solemnly. She disappeared about a year ago. Her parents died in a wreck. We tried to get her into the system, but she slipped through the cracks. I think she comes back sometimes, though. I found a notebook once, just sitting by the door. Victoria's heart thudded, slow and deliberate. She's been here, watching, writing, and I stepped over her story like a puddle I didn't want to get my shoes wet in. Can I see the classroom? She asked suddenly. Gonzalez hesitated, then unlocked the door. Inside, the room was frozen in time. Desks still arranged in rows. A faded world map on the wall. Bookshelves half empty, their spines sagging like tired spines. On the whiteboard, a single sentence written in childlike handwriting, almost wiped away. If you speak it, it means you're real. Victoria moved slowly through the room. She reached the 3rd desk in the 2nd row. There, scratched lightly into the wood, were the words, "Don't forget us." For the first time in years, her eyes stung. She sat in the chair. The wood creaked. Something sharp jabbed her from underneath. A small, plastic bag had been taped beneath the desk. She tore it off and opened it. Inside, a worn photo of a little girl, beaming next to a woman, probably Miss Santos, and a folded paper. A story written in 2 languages. The title? The Queen Who Didn't Know She Was Dying. Victoria read the first line aloud, her voice trembling. There once was a queen who ruled a land of language, but had no one left to talk to. Stopped, closed her eyes. This child saw me. She wrote me. Outside the classroom, the bell rang. But inside 2B, time had stopped. Victoria Langford, who'd built billion-dollar technologies to decode every dialect known to man, was now being decoded by a child who'd slept in doorways and written in the dark. And the translation she feared most was the one happening inside her. Somewhere on the city's wet streets, a girl with nothing had dared to write the truth about a woman with everything, and the queen of ice and iron was starting to thaw, but she didn't yet know the storm was just beginning. Asterisk, asterisk. The storm had shifted. It wasn't in the weather, though San Francisco's skies still wept over its rooftops, but in the way Victoria Langford moved through the world. Something had lodged beneath her skin. Something sharp. Something alive. It had a name. Isabel. Since the classroom visit to Roosevelt Elementary, Victoria had read that story 10 times. There once was a queen who ruled a land of language, but had no one left to talk to. It wasn't just writing, it was prophecy. And the queen couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, Victoria returned to the alley. Not as a queen, not in her heels. Not with her driver. She came alone, in a dark wool coat and flat shoes that could handle puddles. Her hair, normally coiled in ruthless precision, was down damp from the mist, wind tangled. Her makeup was gone, her face bare. Building overhang where she'd first seen Isabel was empty. The cardboard sheet had been taken. The wall tagged with new graffiti. Property is theft. Her heart sank. Too late dot, but then dash something dot movement at the far corner, near the loading dock of an abandoned print shop. A flicker of lamplight. Faint rustling. Victoria approached slowly, the weight of her boots making splashes in the dark. As she stepped closer, the scent of wet ink and garbage hung in the air like forgotten dreams. Then she saw her. Curled in the lee of the building was Isabel, wrapped in a torn blanket, scribbling in a new notebook lit by a small battery-operated lamp. Her pencil moved fast, frantic like someone trying to trap lightning on paper before it vanished. Victoria stopped, just outside the ring of light, silent, but Isabel didn't flinch. She didn't even look up. She knew. "I wondered when you'd come back," she said softly. Victoria blinked. "You knew I would." "You read the story," Isabel said. "That's usually when the queen starts looking for the dragon," she thought. She'd already killed. Victoria stepped closer, cautiously. "What am I looking for?" Isabel finally looked up. "Your soul," she said. "It's been hiding." A pause, charged like a storm cloud. "I don't need help," Isabel added, as if to reclaim control of the conversation. "I didn't say I came to help," Victoria replied. "Then why are you here?" The air trembled with the question. Victoria stared at her. This child who slept in doorways, but spoke in parables. Who had nothing but saw everything. "I read your story," Victoria said. "You wrote about me before we met." "I wrote about a type," Isabel said, shrugging. "Powerful people who think they're untouchable. But they forget when you're up high, you can't hear what people are whispering below. That's where stories live, in the dark." "And what are you?" Victoria asked. "The storyteller or the shadow?" Isabel smiled. "I'm both." Silence fell again, heavier this time. The kind of silence that fills a courtroom just before a verdict. Victoria knelt, not caring about the wet concrete. "Do you know what your stories are worth?" she asked. "Nothing," Isabel answered, without hesitation. "Because I don't write for money. I write to survive." "No," Victoria said quietly. "You write to translate." Isabel blinked. "Translate what?" Victoria reached into her coat and pulled out the folded page from Roosevelt Elementary, The Queen's Story. She said, "You translated me. And I don't know how." "But you did?" Isabel looked at her with that unnerving stillness again, like she was staring through her, not at the face, but the fault lines beneath. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said. "You didn't," Victoria replied. "You rewrote me." She held out the page. Isabel took it reverently. "Why are you really here?" Isabel asked, more softly now. "I want to offer you something," Victoria said. Isabel tensed. "I'm not a charity case." "I'm not offering charity," Victoria said. "I'm offering a job." The words felt absurd even as she said them. But she meant it. Isabel tilted her head, brows furrowing. "A job?" "Come work with me," Victoria said. "Write, edit, consult. You see people. I need someone who sees people. Not just code or revenue or projections. People. I'm 9. You're brilliant. I don't have a bank account. I have 100. I'm homeless. Then let's fix that." Isabel's breath caught, and for a flicker of a moment, her composure cracked. Just enough for Victoria to see the child underneath. The lonely, scared, hopeful child. "You don't get to fix me," Isabel said quickly. "I'm not a tech problem." "I know," Victoria replied. "You're a story, and I want to read every chapter." A pause. Long, unbroken dot. Then Isabel whispered, "Can I keep writing?" Victoria nodded. Only if you promise not to stop rewriting me. Isabel didn't smile. Not yet, but she handed Victoria her notebook. Then let's start here, she said. Translate this page. It's written in pain. Let's see if your company's software can handle that. Victoria took it. No, AI could decode it, but she would try, because for the first time in her life, Victoria Langford, Queen of Ice and Iron, was being invited to learn a new language. Not Spanish, not French, not Mandarin, but the language of hope. And Isabel? She wasn't just teaching it. She was the native speaker, but neither of them knew that a storm was already gathering, a storm that would challenge everything they were about to build. Because when the world finds out the Queen is bleeding, it sends hunters. And Isabel Rojas had just become the only thing keeping Victoria Langford human. Asterisk. The sky over San Francisco cracked open 2 days later, not with thunder, but with headlines. Language empire profits off public school desperation. Leaked docs reveal. Linguatech accused of pricing out bilingual access for underprivileged kids. Victoria Langford, Queen of AI or villain of the vulnerable? The stories came in waves, each more damning than the last. Emails, internal memos, audio clips, a spreadsheet of markup margins for public school contracts. All leaked anonymously. Victoria sat in her glass-walled office, watching her empire fracture through a wall of screens. She wore the same composure she had when first building Linguatech from her basement. Straight back, unreadable face, heart encased in calculation. But something had shifted inside her. The day she met Isabel again, she'd ordered a background check. On herself, not Isabel. She wanted to know what the world saw when it looked at her. The answer had arrived swiftly and without mercy. A predator in a tailored dress. She hadn't slept in 36 hours. The PR team was in meltdown. Legal advised silence. Her board called an emergency session. But it was room 2B at Roosevelt Elementary. Damn room that haunted her. And more than that, it was what she'd found taped under Isabel's desk the night she'd returned alone. Unable to stop thinking about that story, the Queen who didn't know she was dying, the bag had contained more than a photo and story. It also held a receipt, one of the original licensing agreements signed by Linguatech's legal department. Victoria's signature, bold and brutal, was scrawled beneath the line item, Roosevelt Elementary, Spanish translation module, 320%. Markup. No non-profit discount applied. Executive override approved. Her override. Her name got her decision. Victoria stood at the edge of her glass tower and looked out over the city. But this time, she didn't see stock indexes or market shares. She saw ghosts, little ones, their voices buried in margins, their stories lost in footnotes. Her phone buzzed again. Victoria, came Rebecca's breathless voice. There's a situation. A video just surfaced. You need to see this. The screen on Victoria's desk flickered, then filled with grainy footage filmed on a phone in poor lighting. The alley. The same spot where Victoria had first seen Isabel. And in the frame, Victoria herself, crouching on the ground, wet, barefaced, holding a child's notebook like it was a sacred relic. There was no sound. But none was needed. In the caption below, someone had typed, "The Queen meets the storyteller." It was going viral. Already. Within 5 minutes. A hashtag trended worldwide. Hashtag the Queen and the girl Victoria gripped the edge of her desk as if the steel beneath her fingers could hold her steady. But it couldn't. The world had seen something she hadn't intended to show. Vulnerability. Humanity. Worse. Curiosity. Her silence had been her shield, but now she was exposed, and someone wanted to destroy her. She turned from the windows and pulled up security access logs. The leak hadn't come from outside. It came from inside. 3 people had accessed the school, licensing archives in the past week. Only one had a direct link to Isabel Rebecca, Victoria's assistant. She stared at the name as the pieces began to fall into place. The hesitation in her voice, the lingering glances at the contracts, the way she'd once said, "They're asking for help, not a handout." Betrayal. Or was it conscience? The intercom crackled. "Victoria," came security's voice. "There's a girl at the lobby entrance. Says she knows you. Refuses to leave." Victoria froze. Her name? Isabel Rojas. Victoria was already moving. She stepped into the private elevator, descending. From her glass throne, like a queen abandoning a castle, under siege. The elevator doors opened into chaos. Reporters outside the building pounded against the glass with microphones and camera lenses. Employees whispered, parted like waves as she passed. Her heels echoed in a tempo that matched her pulse. At the far end of the lobby stood Isabel, still small, still worn, but fiercer than any army Victoria had ever faced. She held a single sheet of paper. No notebook. No walls. Just a page. When Victoria approached, Isabel raised her eyes, those deep, endless eyes, and said, "You're going to want to read this." Victoria took the page. It was a story, only 4 paragraphs long, but it hit harder than a lawsuit. There once was a queen who ruled. A language so precise, even her lies sounded like logic. She believed that if she kept her heart locked away, nothing could hurt her. And it worked, until a girl with no home spoke a truth no mirror could reflect. That words weren't made to be sold. They were made to heal. The queen had to choose. Protect her castle of profit, or burn it down to build a bridge. She lit the match. The kingdom screamed. But some screamed in hope. Victoria looked up. Isabel didn't flinch. "Did you leak it?" Victoria asked, voice low. "No," Isabel said calmly. "But I inspired someone who did." Victoria swallowed. "You've started a war." "No," Isabel replied. "I ended one. Between who you are and who you pretend to be." Victoria exhaled, long, slow. Then handed Isabel her own phone. "Call whoever you need to," she said. "Why?" "Because tomorrow morning, I'm holding a press conference. And I want you standing next to me." "Why me?" "Because I've built a billion-dollar empire," Victoria said. "But not a single word of it was true until you spoke." Isabel stared at the phone, then took it. The war had begun, but so had the revolution. And the queen had just chosen her side. The morning of the press conference, San Francisco felt like it was holding its breath. Thick fog blanketed the bay, rolling between buildings like a tide of judgment. The city had become a mirror reflecting both shame and hope in equal measure. Outside Skyview Tower, a sea of cameras, protest signs, and reporters churned like waves against marble. Some held signs that read, "Language is not luxury. Justice for Roosevelt. Hashtag the Queen and the Girl. Isabel speaks for us all." And above them all, the twin glass doors of Linguatech Global loomed once, a symbol of silence and control. Now, they would open, and the world would listen. Inside, Victoria Langford stood alone in her private dressing suite, staring at her reflection. Her usual power armor, a $4,000 blazer, Ice Queen ponytail, stiletto heels lay untouched on the rack behind her. She wore a plain navy blouse, flats, and no jewelry, not even her watch. Time was no longer something she controlled. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pinned a small silver brooch to her collar, the shape of a bridge. A gift from Isabel the night before, handed to her with no ceremony and a single whispered sentence. "Only wear it if you mean it." The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. As the doors opened to the main lobby, her board of directors waited, silent, stone-faced, power suits, and predator eyes. She could smell the panic beneath the cologne. "You're not obligated to do this," murmured Richard Holmes, CFO, lips tight. "The legal team has drafted a public statement. Controlled language. Moderate apology. Focus tested. We can contain." "This. I'm not here to contain anything," Victoria said. She didn't wait for permission. She stepped past them, toward the doors, toward the world. The cameras exploded in light. Microphones lunged forward like weapons. Voices shouted over each other in multiple languages, demanding clarity, accountability, confession. But then gasps. Because behind Victoria, walking with measured steps and remarkable calm, was Isabel. She wore a donated blue dress and a too big denim jacket. But her chin was high, her hands steady. In her grip, a freshly written story. They reached the podium. Victoria took a breath. And for the first time in her life, she spoke with no script, no prepared statement. "Today," she began. No talking points, no sanitized regret. Silence. The city leaned in. She turned to Isabel. "Because I've been speaking the wrong language my entire life. And it's time someone else spoke." She stepped aside. Isabel looked tiny behind the podium, but her voice carried like thunder. "My name is Isabel Rojas. I am 9 years old. I live in a shelter some nights. Other nights I write stories under the lights of coffee shops that are about to close. I've learned English and Spanish. But the language I speak best is truth." Cameras stopped clicking. Phones stopped recording. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to listen. 2 years ago, my parents died. They were immigrants. They didn't have much. But they told me that words could change the world. So I kept writing, even when I had no home. Even when no one read them. She turned to look at Victoria. Until someone did. The crowd stirred. She used to be someone I was scared of. Someone who built a company by building walls, words you had to pay to understand. But then she did something crazy. She listened. The pause was intentional. I am PACTFUL. Now we're building something new. A company that doesn't just speak for the powerful. A company that listens to the invisible. A tear slid down someone's cheek in the front row. A reporter. Hardened, but undone. "You asked me why a child should speak at a press conference," Isabel said, scanning the crowd. "And my answer is this, because adults forgot how. You traded truth for profit. You turned kindness into weakness. And you let your hearts get so scared of being hurt, you stopped using them." She lifted her story. But words can fix that. Stories can fix that. If we let them. And with that, she stepped back. Silence. But not the cold kind. The holy kind. Then came the eruption. Applause. Tears. Reporters shaking hands with each other, nodding in stunned disbelief. Victoria stepped forward again, her voice firm now. "Ire reborn in truth. I hereby announce the complete overhaul of Linguitech's nonprofit and educational pricing policies. Effective immediately, translation services for all underfunded public institutions will be provided at cost or donated. Outright." Flashes exploded again. "We are reinstating every bilingual program canceled due to our previous pricing models. Starting with Roosevelt Elementary." Shouts of joy. "Miss Santos has been offered her position back." Another cheer. "And Isabel Rojas," Victoria said, placing a hand gently on the girl's shoulder, "has been appointed as our youngest ever creative ethics advisor." Gasps. A 9-year-old with a job title, with a voice, with power, not because of pity, Victoria continued, but because she sees what we miss. Because she reminds us why we started speaking in the first place. And because I want her to remind me, every single day, what happens when you stop listening. She looked Isabel in the eyes. I will never stop listening again. The applause became deafening. But deep in the crowd, not everyone was clapping. At the back of the press throne, a woman in her 60s stood in silence, eyes fixed on Isabel. She wore a black shawl, held a rosary. She whispered something in Spanish under her breath, then turned and vanished into the crowd. Victoria didn't see her, but Isabel did. And for the first time in months, she felt cold. Because some ghosts don't live in stories. Some walk among us, quiet and waiting, and not every storm it passed. Not yet. Not while blood still called across borders. Asterisk. For 3 days, the world couldn't stop talking about the Queen and the girl. News anchors recited Isabel's speech like scripture. Editors wrote columns titled, "A 9-year-old Saved. Billion-Dollar Soul." Children in bilingual classrooms across the country held up handmade signs on TikTok. "We speak because Isabel did." Victoria Langford's stock had plummeted and then skyrocketed, but she didn't care. She wasn't watching the market. She was too busy watching Isabel. They spent their mornings together now, sometimes in Victoria's office, where Isabel would sit cross-legged on an expensive Italian sofa and edit marketing materials with a red pen, circling words like optimization and replacing them with human. Sometimes they went to Roosevelt Elementary, where Miss Santos had returned to the classroom like a resurrected saint, and Isabel sat in her old desk again, this time as a visitor who could finally breathe. Isabel smiled more, but never too wide. She was waiting, always listening, like she knew joy never lasted. Unchallenged. It came in the form of a letter, delivered not to Victoria's office, but to Roosevelt Elementary, marked with an international seal. Isabel was in the middle of reading aloud to a group of younger children when Miss Santos approached, holding the envelope like it was a weapon wrapped in paper. "Isabel," she said gently, "you need to come with me." Victoria arrived 10 minutes later. She had been in a meeting with the Department of Education. Her assistant whispered, "It's urgent. Principal Gonzalez called." And her body had gone ice cold, just like that. Now she stood in a side office next to Miss Santos, a trembling Isabel, and a sheet of paper that felt heavier than steel. The envelope lay torn open on the table. Victoria picked up the document, read the letter once, then again. Then she sat down. Slowly. Double quotes, "Isabel," she said, her voice calm but not steady. "This letter is from the Mexican consulate." Isabel's eyes didn't move, but her shoulders tightened. "They've been contacted by someone claiming to be your grandmother," Victoria continued. "Carmen Rojas. She lives in Guadalajara. She filed a motion for legal guardianship 2 years ago. And apparently, she's won." The room went silent, like someone had yanked the oxygen out of it. "I don't understand," Isabel whispered. They said there was no one." Victoria nodded slowly. "That's what they believed at the time. But your grandmother never stopped trying. She didn't know where you were until she saw the press conference." Isabel blinked. "She saw me?" Victoria nodded. "She saw you speak, heard your name, and now she's asking for you." "Why didn't she come before?" Isabel asked, voice trembling with confusion and anger, and a sorrow too deep for her years. "Why now? After I finally found someone?" No one answered, because there was no answer that would matter. "She filed her case in Mexico," Victoria said. "And that country has jurisdiction too. The courts. They've ruled that she has a right to claim you." Isabel's voice cracked, like ice underfoot. "To take me back?" "Yes." A long pause, then a whisper. "What if I don't want to go?" Miss Santos took Isabel's hand, but Victoria stepped forward, kneeling to meet her gaze. "This isn't over," she said. "Nothing is final, but legally, it means we'll have to fight. In 2 countries, with 2 governments. And it will be messy, and slow and hard. "Will I be allowed to speak?" Isabel asked, her voice barely audible. Asterisk. Victoria's heart cracked open. "You'll have to speak," she said, "because no one can tell your story like you can." That night, Victoria sat alone in her penthouse, a silence thick and endless. She stared at the moon reflected in her floor-to-ceiling windows, a perfect glowing circle. Distant, beautiful, alone. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Isabel. "If I get taken away, will you forget me?" Victoria's thumbs hovered over the screen. Then she typed, "Never. I will fight." Until the very last word. She hit send. Then cried for the first time in a decade. But across the city, someone else was preparing too. In a small house in Guadalajara, an old woman held the press conference video in her wrinkled hands. She watched Isabel speak again and again, tears wetting the screen. "My little girl," she whispered, "you sound just like your papa." Then she turned to her lawyer and said in perfect Spanish, "Bring her home." And just like that, the real battle began. It wouldn't be fought on stages or screens. It would be fought in courtrooms, in embassies, in hearts. Because the truth was now undeniable. The Queen had changed. But the past hadn't, and blood still had its claim. The fog had thickened again. San Francisco's skyline was barely visible beyond the courtroom windows, like a half-erased painting. Inside Department 402 of the Superior Court, it was cold in a different way, air-conditioned. Silent, sterile. The kind of place where stories became facts, where love became arguments, and where a child's future was whittled into legal terminology by people who had never knelt beside her in the rain or read her stories by flashlight. Victoria Langford sat at the long oak table, flanked by two high-powered attorneys and a child custody specialist. Her dress was simple. Her eyes were not. Behind the calm, she was burning. On the opposite bench sat Carmen Rojas, Isabel's paternal grandmother. She was smaller than Victoria expected, wrinkled, gentle. Her hair was woven into a long silver braid, her hands folded in prayer over a gombe. Worn photo of Isabel's father as a boy. Her eyes, though, they were sharp, not cruel, but immovable. A mountain kind of sharp, the kind that doesn't budge for weather. Isabel sat between them. In the middle, exactly where she didn't belong. Judge Harris adjusted her glasses. "We are here to determine temporary custodial rights in accordance with international family law. Both parties will be given equal opportunity to present evidence and testimony. Miss Rojas, you may begin." Carmen stood. Her voice was soft but clear, like hymnals in stone churches. "My granddaughter is the only child of my son. When he died, I tried to bring her home. But I had no address, no phone, and no help. The American system lost her. I did not." She held up documents, faded and stamped. "These are the petitions I filed, letters I wrote, appeals I submitted. For 2 years I lit candles and mailed hope into silence." She turned to Isabel. "You are blood of my blood, Nina. Your papa was my eldest. He built our family's future when he crossed the border. But you belong to your roots, to your language, to your people. You are not American stories. You are Mexican soil, and you were never meant to grow without it." Victoria felt her stomach churn. The words were beautiful. Dangerous. She stood slowly. "Your Honor," she said, "I do not dispute Miss Rojas's love. But love alone does not prove best interest." She looked at Isabel, not the judge, not the room. Isabel didn't just survive. She created. While the system failed her, she built a voice. She built the bridge. She turned loss into language. And she chose where she felt safe, where she was seen. She pulled out a stack of printed pages. dozens of stories, all signed with the same initials, IRR. These aren't evidence, Victoria said. They're testimony. A voice that says, I belong where I am not invisible. The judge leaned forward. Miss Rojas, she said softly, would you like to say anything yourself? Isabel stood slowly, feet barely touching the floor from the tall witness chair. Her voice, when it came, was steady, older than it should have been. I don't want to choose between a heart and a history, she said. A pause. She looked at Carmen. I never stopped loving my parents. I want to learn Spanish better. I want to know the songs my mama sang when I was a baby. I want to go to Mexico someday. Maybe every summer. Maybe even Christmas. I want to meet cousins. I want to know where I come from. She turned toward Victoria. But I also know where I became someone. Her small hand clutched the silver bridge brooch on her collar, the one Victoria had given her the night before. I was never just a refugee. I was never just a statistic. I was never just a case file or a sob story. But that's what people made me into, until she didn't. Isabel's eyes scanned the room, unblinking. She read my stories. And then she saw me. Another silence. I don't want to stop writing stories. And I don't want to stop being me. So please, don't make me disappear again. The courtroom was still. Even the judge had to remove her glasses for a moment to breathe. After a long deliberation, Judge Harris leaned forward and said, because of the complexity of this case, and the dual jurisdictions involved, I will not issue a permanent custody ruling today. Instead, I am granting a provisional shared guardianship, effective immediately. Final arrangements to be determined at the next hearing in 60 days. She looked at Carmen and Victoria. You will both have rights, but you will both have responsibilities. Then, turning to Isabel, her voice softened. And you, young lady, you have power. Don't let either side forget that. Later that night, Victoria stood by her penthouse window, staring into the haze. She'd won. And lost. At the same time, shared guardianship meant Carmen would have partial authority. Travel rights. A seat at the table. Maybe more if things shifted further in court. That it meant Isabel might still be taken, but it also meant something else. The war wasn't over. The door behind her creaked. Soft footsteps. I can't sleep, came Isabel's voice. Victoria turned. She looked so small in her pajama set, hair loose, eyes wide, but she also looked grounded. Balanced on a cliff. What's on your mind? Victoria asked. Isabel crossed the room, pressed her cheek against Victoria's side. I think this is going to be hard. Yes, Victoria whispered. I think we might lose each other. Maybe. But I also think, Isabel said, looking up at her, that we just proved love isn't about winning. It's about staying. Victoria knelt, held her, and we stay, however long it takes, wherever it takes us. Outside, the fog lifted. For just a moment. A sliver of moonlight broke through. It didn't last long, but it was enough. Because in that single, silent silver beam, the queen and the girl were still standing. Asterisk, 3 weeks after the hearing. The silence in the penthouse grew heavier. Cold. Not angry. Just suspended. Like a breath waiting to be exhaled. Victoria Langford moved through her space. Like someone walking through a dream they weren't sure they wanted to wake from. The light still responded to her voice. The floor still gleamed, the skyline still bowed to her empire, but everything felt muted. Even the coffee had lost its bite, because Isabel was gone. Temporarily. For now, the provisional agreement had granted Carmen Rojas 3 weeks of uninterrupted visitation in Mexico before the next custody hearing. Isabel had insisted she wanted to go, just to see, just to feel it. Victoria hadn't fought her. She had made a promise. Wherever it takes us. But each hour without Isabel felt like a page missing from a novel she just learned how to read. A house once full of scribbled notes, tiny shoes by the door, mismatched hairbands on the sink, now sat still. Dust dared to gather, and still. Every morning, Victoria set a place at the kitchen island just in case, until one morning, her phone buzzed. A message from Isabel. Abuela makes tamales by memory, not recipe. She sings in the kitchen. It feels like echoes. I miss you. Victoria didn't respond right away. She just read it, then reread it, then pressed the screen to her chest, like a child saying grace before a meal. Later that evening, she received a video call request. It wasn't from Isabel. It was from Carmen Rojas. Victoria stared at the screen like it was a bomb waiting to detonate. Then she answered. The video opened on Carmen's face, framed by twilight and warmth. She wore a worn shawl and had a mug of something steaming in hand. Behind her, Isabel was curled in a hammock under glowing paper lanterns, reading from a spiral notebook. She wrote a new story, Carmen said softly. Do you want to hear the title? Victoria nodded once. The Bridge That Didn't Break. The words hit like a chord struck in a quiet room. She's writing about us, Carmen said, voice unreadable. Victoria's mouth was dry. She always writes about what she wants to understand. A long pause. She misses you, Carmen said, but she also fits here. Not like a puzzle piece. More like a song that found its melody. Victoria's heart clenched. I don't doubt that, she said. She belongs to both worlds, Carmen continued. But the question is, what kind of world are we willing to build for her? Victoria's jaw tensed. One where she doesn't have to be torn in half to survive. Carmen sipped her drink. You love her. It wasn't a question. Victoria exhaled. I do. Carmen nodded slowly. I was angry at you. At first, you looked like everything we'd lost her to. Power, wealth, noise. But? Victoria asked. Carmen's eyes softened. But then I saw the way she wrote your name. Victoria blinked. What do you mean? She never calls you Victoria in her stories, Carmen said. She calls you La Loba. Victoria laughed, startled. The wolf? Carmen smiled. Not. The monster kind. The protector. The one who circles the fire and doesn't let the dark take what's inside it. They both sat in silence for a long time. Then Carmen asked the hardest question of all. What if we didn't fight anymore? Victoria stilled. What are you saying? I'm saying, maybe we stop trying to win her and start building. Something that makes her feel like she never has to choose again. Another pause. A shared home, Carmen said. 2 countries. 2 languages. 1 family. Victoria's breath caught. You'd move here? For part of the year, Carmen said. And you'd come to Mexico. You'd learn our holidays. You'd eat at our table. And we'd write laws around that? Victoria asked, half smiling. We'd write stories around it, Carmen replied. Isabel can handle the law. Victoria laughed, then choked on emotion. She probably could. The next day, Victoria flew to Mexico, not in first class, not with an entourage. She arrived at the Rojas family home carrying a battered suitcase, a notebook, and a Spanish phrasebook she hadn't opened since grad school. Isabel ran into her arms before she'd even cleared the gate. I have something to show you, she yelled, dragging Victoria through the courtyard. It's a map, a real one. I made it. Victoria was breathless. A map of what? Of my life, Isabel said, unrolling a sheet covered in stars, arrows, and overlapping circles. Were 2 hearts drawn in opposite corners. One said San Francisco. One said Guadalajara. But in the middle, a bridge, labeled Here. Victoria traced her finger across it. You built this? She asked. No, Isabel said. We did. That night, they ate together on the patio. Carmen passed plates of mole and rice. Victoria translated a story draft into French for fun, and Isabel read aloud a paragraph about a wolf who guarded a child's dream like it was. Treasure got. They laughed. They cried. They argued about tenses in 2 languages. And for the first time since the custody case had started, Victoria felt something stronger than hope, belonging. But as the stars began to emerge above the courtyard, a question lingered, whispered by the wind between walls. Would the courts recognize a bridge built of love? Or would they demand borders be drawn once again? Because in a few short weeks, the final hearing would come. And even bridges, matter how beautifully built, could still be broken if the wrong people held the hammers. Asterisk. The courtroom was warmer this time. Not in temperature, but in tone. The walls still held their bureaucratic dullness, and the judge still wore the same black robe. But something was different. Everyone knew her name now. Isabel Rojas was no longer a faceless case file shuffled between jurisdictions. She was the girl who'd spoken truth to power. The child who had stood at a podium and reminded a billionaire what it meant to be human. Her voice had traveled across continents, and now it would decide her own fate. The courtroom was full. Press weren't allowed inside, but that didn't stop the hallway from brimming with cameras. Protesters and supporters both stood outside one side, waving Mexican flags, the other holding up cardboard signs with handwritten quotes from Isabel's stories. Love is not a location. I speak 2 languages. One is truth. Don't turn bridges into borders. Victoria sat at the front of the courtroom, next to her legal team, but she wasn't focused on strategy anymore. She was focused on the chair beside her. Isabel wore a gray dress and white shoes. Her notebook was pressed tightly to her chest, her silver bridge pin fastened over her heart. Across the aisle, Carmen Rojas sat with quiet strength. No resentment, no bitterness. Just the unshakable dignity of a woman who had raised generations with less than enough, but never less love. The judge called the session to order. Today, we reconvene to determine permanent guardianship of Miss Isabel Rojas. This decision will affect not only the child's custody, but her future rights as a dual citizen of Mexico and the United States. She looked between Victoria and Carmen. We are here to consider not who loves her more, but what environment best supports her intellectual, emotional, cultural, and physical well-being. Miss Rojas, the court has reviewed all submitted evidence, but you have requested to speak before the ruling. She nodded once. You may do so now. The courtroom held its breath. Isabel stood. She approached the judge's bench without trembling, her small frame somehow filling the space like a lighthouse in fog. She unfolded her notebook, then paused. I wrote something for today, she said softly, but I'm not going to read it. Murmurs. She looked up. Because the truth isn't in what I planned. It's in what I feel right now. And if this courtroom is going to decide my life, I want you to hear me, not just my grammar. She walked toward the center of the courtroom, slowly, deliberately. Everyone keeps saying they want what's best for me, and I believe them. I believe Abuela Carmen loves me, and I believe Victoria loves me. Her voice cracked slightly. But I also believe that the system doesn't understand what love looks like when it doesn't fit into paperwork. She turned to the judge. You asked who can give me stability. The answer is, neither of them can do it alone. My heart lives in 2 places, 2 languages, 2 families. Asking me to choose is like asking me to breathe with only 1 lung. The judge remained still, listening. People think kids don't understand the world, Isabel continued. but we understand what it feels like to be moved around like luggage. To be told we're too young to know what's right for us. She took a step closer to the bench. I may be 9 years old, but I'm also someone who knows exactly what it means to be invisible. I spent years on sidewalks, in libraries, writing in the dark, and no judge told me how to survive that. Now her voice rose. So don't tell me I can't decide where I belong. Silence. Tears shimmered in Victoria's eyes. Carmen clasped her rosary, but didn't blink. Isabel looked back at both of them. I don't want to leave either of them behind. I want both. I need both. And I'm asking you, begging you, to believe that love is bigger than borders. She walked back to her seat. The judge wiped her eyes discreetly, then spoke. I will return with my decision after a brief recess. The courtroom emptied slowly. Victoria remained seated, staring at the wood grain of the table, barely breathing. Carmen leaned in. She's not just our child, she whispered. She's the future. Victoria nodded. And she's already wiser than either of us. 20 minutes later, the judge returned. Everyone rose. The ruling was brief, but final. In recognition of the unique psychological maturity, bilingual identity, and emotional bonds involved in this case, the court hereby grants joint and rotational permanent custody to both guardians, Ms. Victoria Langford and Ms. Carmen Rojas. Gasps, the judge continued. Ms. Rojas will spend academic terms in San Francisco under the primary care of Ms. Langford, with full educational and therapeutic support. She will spend summers and alternate holidays in Guadalajara with her grandmother, with full cultural and familial immersion. She paused. And if, at any point, Isabel wishes to reevaluate this arrangement, she may submit a petition in her own voice at any time. Her voice has been deemed legally sufficient. The gavel fell. The courtroom erupted. Victoria turned to Isabel, but Isabel had already launched herself into her arms. They held each other like survivors of war. Across the aisle, Carmen smiled through tears, then approached and placed her hands on both their shoulders. We are not halves anymore, she said. We are whole. That night, they celebrated on the rooftop of Skyview Tower. 3 generations. 2 cultures. 1 family. Isabel read her story after dinner. The real one. The one she had originally planned for the courtroom. Once, there was a bridge made of paper. People said it would fall, that the wind of culture and the rain of distance would tear it apart. But the bridge didn't break, because love walked across it every day and left behind footprints that made it stronger. And over time, the bridge stopped being paper. It became stone. Victoria wiped her eyes. Carmen kissed Isabel's forehead. The city glowed below them. Somewhere far off, church bells rang in both Spanish and silence. And the queen of algorithms, the wolf who once ruled alone from her glass tower, finally understood. The most powerful empire she had ever built had started with a girl, a notebook, and a question. Can you read this? Now she could. And she would every day for the rest of her life. Because the bridge had held, and it would never fall again.